Imagine you're at the helm of an organization, right? Could be a bustling startup, could be a huge established company. And you're constantly facing these waves of change. Market shifts, new tech. What customers want is always evolving. So the real question isn't if you need to change. It's, well, it's how. Do you, as the leader, lay out this grand vision, get everyone on board, and kind of steer the ship from the top down? Or is it better to create an environment where, every single person, every team feels empowered to experiment, to learn, to adapt from the ground up, letting the strategy sort of emerge naturally? Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most fundamental questions in organizational transformation. What's really the most effective way to make change happen? We're going to explore two profoundly different philosophies here, and honestly, I think this is one of the toughest dilemmas any leader faces. It touches everything, from how you run things day to day, right up to long-term survival.
Absolutely. And I'd say it's more than just a dilemma. It's this constant tension, you know? Because these aren't just like abstract ideas from a textbook. They represent really core choices in how we lead, how we innovate, and frankly, how we manage to succeed when the world keeps shifting under our feet. So, what we're doing today is essentially staging a debate. On one side, you've got visionary leadership, that principle centered, often top down model, think Stephen Covey. And on the other side, emergent strategy, which is much more about iteration, bottom up adaptation, very much in the spirit of, say, Eric Ries and the lean startup ideas. It's this dynamic tension that really every organization, every leader has to grapple with.
That's exactly it. That's where the rubber meets the road. So I'll be kind of channeling the spirit of Stephen Covey today. My argument is going to be that true, lasting change, it has to start with the leader's character, their clear vision. It needs to flow downwards to create this strong, unified direction. My case essentially is that without that firm hand, that clear sense of purpose, organizations just risk drifting, becoming inefficient, confused.
And I'll be championing the other side, the bottom up perspective. I'll draw on insights from iterative development, agile methods. My argument, that change is fundamentally organic. It's a process of continuous experimentation, continuous learning, and it's often driven from the front lines by the people closest to the actual work, closest to the customer. My conviction here is that in today's world, which is so unpredictable, relying only on a top-down blueprint, well, that can make you blind to really crucial things that are emerging right in front of you.
Okay, so as our listener, you're going to hear both sides of this. We've got some, I think, surprising facts, some really interesting real-world examples that show these forces at play. Our mission together is to help you navigate your own path to change. Maybe you're prepping for a big meeting, maybe you're just trying to get up to speed on this field, or maybe you're just incredibly curious about how organizations actually transform. We want to help you understand this core tension, visionary leadership versus emergent strategy, and how it really impacts everything, daily stuff, long-term success. So, yeah, let's dig in. All right, let's start by making the case for top-down visionary leadership. And it really begins at the deepest possible level, the leader themselves. Drawing directly from Stephen Covey here, my core argument is that genuine organizational change, the kind that sticks, isn't just about, rolling out new software or writing a new policy. It truly starts with the leader's internal paradigm, their character, their deeply held principles. It's an inside-out kind of approach.
The character ethic versus the personality ethic.
Exactly. Covey was very critical of what he called the personality ethic. Those quick fixes, the superficial techniques that might look good, might work for a bit when the sun is shining, as he put it. But, he warned, these approaches often just crumble when difficult times come, and they will. Lasting influence, true self-respect, the ability to actually lead others effectively, that comes from dominion over self. It comes from having a principle center built on unchanging values, integrity, fairness, honesty, human dignity, things like that.
So it's about building on a solid foundation.
Precisely. When leaders are centered on these correct principles, Covey says it creates a solid foundation for their security, their guidance, their wisdom, their power. These are stable anchors, unlike being centered on, say, popularity or short-term results. It's about the leader focusing on their circle of influence.
Yeah.
What they can actually control and influence directly instead of just reacting to everything happening outside. He tells this story about his son having real problems at school. Instead of blaming the school or his son, he and his wife focused on changing their own reactions, their own paradigms first. And that eventually positively influenced the whole situation.
That's a powerful personal example.
It is. And the big insight here from Covey is that organizational resilience isn't just found in market reports or tech. It's built inside the leader. It's this deep well of character that provides an anchor when everything else is shifting.
So what does this really mean for driving change? It means the real, lasting change doesn't start with some flashy new initiative. It starts with you, the leader, with your unwavering commitment to those foundational principles. It's this inside-out approach that builds resilience, authenticity, right into the leadership itself. And that creates this powerful ripple effect through the whole organization. Okay, so once you have that character, that principle-centered foundation, what's next for top-down leadership? It's setting a clear, unifying vision, a strategic direction. This is about providing the big picture, what to do and the why for everyone. Covey defines a habit as where knowledge, what to do, why, skill, how to do, and desire, want to do, all intersect. For changing an organization, this means leaders have to clearly articulate that what and why, so everyone gets the destination and the purpose behind the journey. Without it, well, people just drift.
Even with the best intentions.
Right. Even the most dedicated team needs that North Star. Peter Drucker, another giant in management thinking, really hammers this point home. He emphasizes the executive's core responsibility for that top-level strategic thinking. He said something like, asking what is right for the enterprise doesn't guarantee the right decision, but failing to ask the question virtually guarantees the wrong decision.
So the buck stops at the top for the big question.
Exactly. It's not about micromanaging every detail, but about providing that overarching direction. Another source we looked at, strategic flexibility, defines a leader as a visionary, a strategist, an informer, a teacher, and an inspirer. Their main job, providing a vision for the organization and coordinating the activities and resources in pursuit of that vision.
It's a really comprehensive role, setting the whole stage. Think about P&G's Olay brand, that strategic decision they made to bridge the mass and prestige markets, creating what they ended up calling a masstige category, blending mass market reach with a more premium feel.
Yeah, that was a big shift for them. Huge. And it was absolutely a top-down visionary move. It wasn't some small experiment bubbling up. It was a deliberate, high-level choice to completely transform the brand's image and market position. And that required massive coordination across the board. Hamilton Helmer, in his book 7 Powers, also talks about this. He says, good strategy involves assessing power with respect to each competitor, aiming to maximize potential fundamental business value, and find a route to continuing power in significant markets.
High-level strategic thinking.
Definitely. These are clearly top-down objectives flowing from a leader's vision, shaping the entire competitive game. For a really concrete example of this kind of top-down clarity and accountability, think about Alfred P. Sloan Jr. at General Motors way back. His systematic management approach, you can read about it in What Makes an Effective Executive, involved these structured meetings. He'd listen intently, and then right after, he'd write a short memo to one person who was there. It would summarize the discussion, the conclusions, spell out any specific work assignment, set a deadline, and name the executive who was accountable. Boom.
Yeah. Crystal clear accountability.
Absolutely. That's top-down clarity in action, making sure everyone knows the vision and exactly what their part is in making it happen. It's about building this disciplined, focused machine, all moving powerfully in one direction. All right, so the vision and strategy are set. What then? Well, top-down leadership is responsible for actually driving the change. And that means putting the necessary structures, processes, and high standards in place. And look, this might involve some discomfort, some tough choices, but it's seen as absolutely essential for executing effectively. Consider something like top-down budgeting. An HBR piece described this. Senior management sets very specific targets, net income, profit margin, expenses, whatever. Then the unit managers have to build their budgets within those parameters.
So the strategy dictates the resource allocation directly.
Exactly. It's a very clear, structural way to implement a top-down strategic choice. Ensures the money follows the goals. Daniel Goleman talks about a leadership style he calls the pace-setting style. This is where a leader sets high-performance standards and exemplifies them himself. He says this has a very positive impact on employees who are self-motivated and highly competent. Now, sure, it can overwhelm others, maybe, but for the right teams, it absolutely drives excellence, pushes everyone to reach higher, faster.
That standards, high performance.
Right. And you see this in really aggressive growth strategies, too, like blitzscaling. That's all about prioritizing speed and market dominance over, say, initial efficiency. Often involves significant short-term costs. Think about Airbnb's early days. Their rapid parallel market development, expanding globally from just one office to like 20 in a single year.
Yeah.
That was described as highly inefficient at the time.
But it was a deliberate choice.
Totally deliberate. A top-down strategic bet, prioritizing speed and getting that market share to stand out from its competitors. Or look at Mark Zuckerberg hiring Sheryl Sandberg specifically for her experience blitzscaling, and then filling other key leadership roles at Facebook with experienced scale executives, Mike Schroepfer for engineering, David Ebersman as CFO. That demonstrates a very decisive top-down approach to getting the right leadership and capabilities in place to achieve a super ambitious vision.
Fast. Building the team for scale from the top.
Exactly. And here's where it gets really interesting, I think. Because it's not just setting goals, it's about architecting the entire engine of the organization, defining roles, demanding excellence, all to reach that shared future. Steve Jobs famously said, "The best innovation is sometimes the company, the way you organize a company." His intense focus on organizational design, that was a strategic top-down decision made specifically to enable innovation the way he envisioned it.
The structure enables the outcome.
Precisely. Or think about the sheer scale of change driven by someone like Robert Moses in New York, as chronicled in The Power Broker. His sheer force of personality, his ability to bend men to his will, that allowed him to pull off seemingly impossible public works projects, like literally creating land for a bridge approach by just pounding bulkheads into a bay and dumping sand.
An incredible force of will.
Incredible. And it demonstrates this highly centralized top-down driving force for massive physical structural change. These leaders, they don't just dream, they impose the architecture, the discipline needed to make those dreams real. It's about designing a system for predictable, powerful movement.
That intentional design is undeniably powerful, especially when you know exactly where you want to go. But what happens when the destination itself is fuzzy, or maybe changing, or when the best way to get there is completely unknown? My argument here is that, particularly in the kind of complex, dynamic world we live in now, change often emerges much more, organically. It doesn't always come from a grand plan laid out up front. It often comes from continuous experimentation, iteration, direct feedback from the market. It's like discovering the path as you walk it.
So less blueprint, more exploration.
Exactly. Think about Clayton Christensen's work in The Innovator's Dilemma. So influential. He points out how disruptive technologies usually get their start in emerging or insignificant markets, often commercialized by startups. These startups, they had to find new customers, selling to whoever would buy. It was this trial and error approach that actually led to dominant things like personal computers and laptops.
Not designed for the mass market initially.
Not at all. The breakthroughs didn't come from some top-down plan for the existing big market. They emerged from relentless, small-scale experiments and adaptation out on the fringes. Or consider SpaceX's early Falcon 1 launches. Elon Musk's team, they went through this intense iterative process. Try another launch, learn from the failure. They test fire, launch, fail. He even described one failure as, then it starts to wiggle. They gather data and repeat. They did this over and over before finally nailing a successful test fire.
Learning by doing, essentially.
Yeah.
Failure was part of the process.
Absolutely. It perfectly exemplifies learning through repeated, small-scale experiments, not perfect upfront planning. Success emerged from that cycle. Build, measure, learn. The concept of strategic flexibility also touches on this. It talks about organizations built for uncertainty, highlighting things like decentralized integration network structures, emphasizing heterogeneity, diversity, adaptability. These are the characteristics that really thrive when there's a lot of information, a lot of change. It discusses organizations designed to maximize learning throughout by building learning right into the daily routines, often with little or no hierarchy, maybe few managers.
Sounds very different from the Sloan model.
Totally different. It aligns perfectly with an emergent bottom-up model where insights and adaptations are flowing constantly across the network, not just trickling down from the top. And then there's the classic story of Walmart's early days with Sam Walton. He had his own personal educational process, right? He'd go shop competitor stores, literally looking up from the floor to get these bottom-up insights into how retail actually worked. And he famously empowered his managers, like Phil Green, who Walton told, let me do whatever I wanted on these promotions. So Green lines up 200 riding mowers out front, probably looked crazy, and sold every single one.
That's trusting the front line.
Exactly. It shows the power of frontline initiative, that emergent problem-solving in action. So if you connect all this to the bigger picture, what it shows is that these breakthrough innovations, these big organizational shifts, they don't always arrive fully formed from some genius at the top. Often they bubble up from lots of small, informed experiments out at the edges, where direct feedback from the market, from the customer, from the people doing the work every day shapes the path forward. It's about building a learning organization, not just one that takes orders.
Okay, so it's about learning and experimentation at the edges. How does that connect to the people within the organization?
That's the next crucial piece. Sustainable change, from this perspective, relies heavily on empowering employees. It's about creating psychological safety, where people feel safe to speak up, to experiment, even to fail sometimes. And it's about building real mechanisms for continuous feedback and adaptation coming from all levels.
So not just suggestion boxes, but real feedback loops.
Real feedback loops. An HBR piece on goal setting actually advises, let your direct reports take the lead in setting your goals. It says targets defined by the employees themselves, obviously, with managerial guidance, engender an important sense of ownership. This directly supports that bottom-up initiative. When people feel they helped create the goals, their commitment just skyrockets.
Makes sense. It's their goal then, not just the company's.
Exactly. And Andrew Grove in High Output Management argues really powerfully for free discussion. He says all points of view, all aspects of an issue should be openly welcomed and debated. He contrasts this sharply with organizations where people just wait until they hear their superiors express their view and then contribute something in support of that view. He calls that a terrible way to manage.
Yeah, that sounds like groupthink waiting to happen.
Totally. It highlights just how crucial open, bottom-up communication, even disagreement, is for making good decisions and actually fostering real change. You see this leadership style reflected in Catherine's approach in The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. Remember, she spent almost all of her time walking the halls, chatting with staff members, and silently observing meetings. She was actively seeking that bottom-up information, trying to understand what was really going on, not just issuing decrees.
Management by walking around, but with a real focus on listening.
Precisely. And Kim Scott's radical candor pushes this further. She emphasizes leaders needing to model the behavior yourself by showing some vulnerability and creating a safe space for others to do the same. This is absolutely critical if you want honest feedback from below. She also warns against leaders who feel superior to their employees, saying that attitude makes it impossible to be a kick-ass boss.
That vulnerability piece is key for trust, isn't it?
Huge. And companies like Ross Inc., they reportedly transformed their business by showing a real desire to listen to and collaborate with each customer. That points to a bottom-up, customer-driven approach where the front lines are constantly feeding insights back, shaping the products. Think about Jim Collins' red flag story as a great analogy here. He tells about a student directly telling him, "Professor Collins, I think you are doing a particularly ineffective job. You are leading too much with your questions and stifling our independent thinking."
Wow, that takes guts from the student and the professor to hear it.
Right. But that kind of direct, candid, bottom-up feedback, if it's welcomed and acted on, is an incredibly powerful engine for change and improvement. It just highlights how critical it is for leaders not just to allow, but to actively encourage that kind of input, even when it's uncomfortable. Without it, organizations risk operating in an echo chamber, completely deaf to the information that could drive their most vital adaptations.
So this bottom-up approach seems particularly suited to complex environments.
Exactly. In today's world, which is incredibly complex, incredibly dynamic and emergent, adaptive strategy is often just much more effective than rigid, pre-planned approaches. It allows for flexibility, for rapid response. General Stanley McChrystal in Team of Teams talks about how technological advances imbue our operating environment with escalating nonlinearity, complexity, and unpredictability. This inherently demands adaptive structures and strategies, the hallmarks of emergent change. Trying to control everything from the top in that kind of environment, it's like trying to map an earthquake with a static map. It just doesn't work.
The map changes too fast.
Way too fast. Milton Friedman, actually, in Capitalism and Freedom, made a related point about market dynamics. He argued that even a private monopoly is likely to be undermined by dynamic changes in the market. This implies that market forces driven by bottom-up competition and innovation are these powerful agents of change against entrenched power. It reflects the emergent nature of how economies evolve.
So competition itself is a bottom-up force for change.
A huge one. And the innovator's dilemma gives us more ammo here. It explains why established companies often get disrupted. It's because disruptive products are simpler and cheaper, they promise lower margins, and crucially, the leading firm's most profitable customers generally don't want them initially. Their existing top-down strategy, optimized for their current best customers, literally blinds them to these emergent opportunities bubbling up from below.
They're focused on sustaining, not disrupting.
Precisely. And look at a classic failure. The Edsel car, described in Business Adventures, Ford, at the time, chose to buck the trend of what the market seemed to want: longer, lower, wider cars. They offered a functional car, but it just missed the mark on consumer preference. It demonstrates how a top-down strategy, however well-researched it might seem, can be disastrous if it's disconnected from that emergent market demand, what customers are actually signaling they want.
Listening to the market is key then.
Absolutely. So it raises this really important question. How can organizations truly thrive if they aren't built to sense and respond to signals, to innovations coming from every corner? Especially when the world around us is so unpredictable. That ability to adapt from the front lines, that can be the difference between sticking around and becoming obsolete.
Okay, this is where it gets really fascinating, isn't it? Because you've made a strong case for bottom-up, emergent strategy, and I laid out the case for top-down vision. But the dangers of going too far to either extreme seem pretty clear. A rigid, purely top-down approach, completely disconnected from what's happening on the ground, that can lead to huge blind spots. Or worse, remember that story about the GE manager, Stelic, from Business Adventures? He figured out real company policy not from official directives, but from subtle impacts, like seeing his boss have lunch with a competitor, even though they were explicitly told not to discuss prices.
That's a massive disconnect between policy and reality.
Huge. And that disconnect can lead to what Covey called malicious obedience. People follow the rules to the absolute letter, but kill the spirit. Like those British train conductors he mentioned, who brought the country to a halt just by following every single procedure meticulously.
Working to rule.
Exactly. Or it can lead to outright failure if you ignore frontline wisdom. Think about the Duke of Song in Master Sun's Art of War. He rejected his minister's very sensible advice to attack the enemy while they were vulnerable crossing a river. Why? Because of some aristocratic code of honor. His top-down inflexibility led to a crushing defeat.
Wow. So top-down rigidity can be fatal. But, the flip side is also true. A purely emergent bottom-up approach with no guiding vision, no clear structure, that can just dissolve into chaos. Michael Gerber warned about this in the E-Myth Revisited. If your business is just about you having more freedom, doing what you like, your own self-indulgence will eventually consume both you and your business if there's no system, no strategy.
The technician trap, right? Working in the business, not on it.
Exactly. Without some kind of top-down shaping, that bottom-up energy risks becoming just an uncoordinated whirlpool of speculation, as Keynes might say, not a directed effort. And that leads to inefficiency, maybe duplication of effort, and a real lack of accountability. The discipline of teams touches on this, noting that just being a formal member of a group doesn't mean people will do the real work or make the same level of commitment if there isn't that clear shared purpose and structure holding it together.
So the energy fizzles out without direction.
It can, yeah. While that bottom-up energy is absolutely vital, without some form of top-down clarity or framework, those brilliant local ideas might just spin in circles and never actually create meaningful impact for the whole organization.
Right. So both extremes highlight this critical human element, don't they? The need for clear communication, for alignment. Whether that clarity comes from the leader's consistent character and vision, or from a shared understanding and commitment built from the ground up. The real challenge, then, it seems, isn't picking a side. It's finding that balance, that interplay.
Indeed. It's definitely not an either-or. The most effective change, from what we see, often looks like this dynamic interplay, almost like a sophisticated dance between these two forces. Consider 3M's famous 15% rule, which Jim Collins talks about in Turning Goals into Results. Now, that was a top-down catalytic mechanism, right? A formal policy set by the executives. But what was it designed for? Explicitly to foster bottom-up innovation, giving scientists dedicated time for their own passion projects. And apparently it evolved over decades to include other folks at 3M too, not just scientists.
That's a brilliant example. Top-down enabling bottom-up.
Exactly. It strategically created the space for emergent creativity to actually happen.
I couldn't agree more. And even Sam Walton, who you rightly point to as the ultimate learn-from-the-ground-up guy, he understood the power of using a top-down push for a bottom-up goal. He used mass communications to transmit the idea. That's a top-down comm strategy. But the idea itself was a small idea, aimed at the folks on the front lines, the ones most responsible for keeping our customers happy.
So amplifying the frontline focus from the top.
Precisely. It shows this clear top-down intention to empower bottom-up action and improve that customer experience. And that was a huge part of how Walmart overtook Kmart and Sears so quickly. It shows top-down can facilitate and amplify, not just dictate.
And it really boils down to adaptability, doesn't it? The concept of total leadership from that HBR article by Friedman also blends these ideas nicely. It starts with leaders figuring out who and what matters most in your life. That's a very top-down, purpose-driven personal vision setting. But then it encourages them to experiment with small changes. That's the bottom-up iterative part, to improve satisfaction across all parts of their life. This mix of having a clear inner vision and then continuously adjusting based on experiments is incredibly powerful.
Right. It shows how those core values, that clear strategic frame, even though they are top-down, can create the context, the safe, purposeful container maybe, where that bottom-up exploration, experimentation, and learning can really thrive. Peter Drucker always emphasized that executives are doers, they execute. Knowledge is only useful when it leads to action. But, as he also stressed, that action needs a clear plan. It needs desired results and a deep understanding of why those results matter, and that why often comes from the top-down direction.
So it's about designing the system to allow for both purpose and discovery.
Yes, a truly potent combination. And in this kind of blended model, the leader's role shifts quite profoundly, I think. It moves away from just dictating orders towards inspiring, enabling, ensuring alignment, but still holding that ultimate accountability for the overall direction of results. Covey's idea of transformational leadership speaks right to this. He said, the more genuine your character, the higher your level of proactivity, the more committed you really are to win-win, the more powerful your influence will be with that other person.
Moving beyond just transactions.
Exactly. It's deeper. The leader's influence comes from their authentic self, their ability to foster genuine engagement, to help people find their own motivation within the larger vision. And Peter Drucker reminds us about accountability too. He pointed out that when people fail in a new job, especially after a promotion, it's often the leader who made a mistake in that people decision, not just the employee failing.
That puts the onus on leadership to set people up for success.
Absolutely. It underscores that top-down accountability includes fostering growth, ensuring the right fit, creating the conditions for success, not just pointing fingers when things go wrong. Even in really structured places like the military, you see this tension. Extreme ownership talks about how operational plans need approval up the chain of command. Sure, that's top-down. But the effectiveness of that whole chain depends on competent execution down the line and clear communication both ways, not just rigid directives. Leif Babin's frustration with getting ludicrous questions from higher HQ shows how top-down interference without understanding the ground truth can actually mess things up.
Yeah, trust in the how is critical there.
It is. So maybe the leader's core job remains defining the what's in the why, building the container, as I said, but then trusting the capabilities, the ingenuity of the teams and individuals inside that container, empowering people to figure out the how, and then making sure those efforts stay aligned with the bigger picture. It's a subtle shift, maybe, but powerful, from pure control to more enlightened guidance.
So thinking about you, our listener, trying to navigate your own change initiatives, the core idea here seems to be really consider the nature of the challenge you're facing. Is it a massive fundamental paradigm shift? Does it require that deep foundational change, a really clear, decisive top-down vision to maybe redefine a whole market or your internal culture? Or is it more like an emerging opportunity? Or maybe a really complex problem where the solution isn't obvious yet? Does that situation demand more agile, iterative adaptation, continuous learning from the ground up?
Knowing what kind of problem you have dictates the approach.
It really helps. That Red Ocean Traps HBR piece highlights how our own mental models, those ingrained assumptions and theories we all carry, can totally undermine efforts to create something new, even if we throw tons of money at it. And this applies to leaders and teams. Just recognizing those unconscious biases, those invisible rules we operate by, that's a critical first step for any kind of change. Whether you lean top-down or bottom-up, you've got to see the filters you're looking through.
Self-awareness is key.
Absolutely. And Ben Horowitz, in The Hard Thing About Hard Things, makes this great point that when a company quadruples in size, the management jobs become brand new jobs. This means people have to essentially requalify for these new, bigger roles, and leaders have to actively manage those transitions. It suggests that just growing forces adaptability from both the top rethinking structures and the bottom individuals stepping up.
Growth itself forces change in roles.
It does. And think about fintech companies. The technological revolution in financial services talks about their challenges. Their solutions are often super emergent, innovative, right? Born from bottom-up tech and iteration. but they still have to navigate huge regulatory complexity. They have to build customer trust from scratch and compete with the massive scale of established financial institutions.
Mm.
This implies that even a really successful emergent strategy has to figure out how to deal with and strategically engage with existing top-down structures and the whole external environment to really succeed. You can't just ignore the world you're operating in.
So the context matters hugely.
Hugely. Which leads to an important question for you, the listener, kind of a self-assessment moment.
Hmm.
How ready is your organization, or even just your team, for either model? Do you really have the deep-seated trust, the psychological safety, the cultural infrastructure for bottom-up autonomy to actually work? Is there a shared understanding of risk tolerance? Or is a clear, decisive vision from the top what's genuinely needed right now to cut through the complexity, align everyone, and provide that necessary direction when the stakes are high and the path forward is really murky? Your honest answer probably dictates your starting point.
That's a really practical set of questions. And building on that, the other crucial takeaway for you, I think, is to actively cultivate a culture, personally and organizationally, that genuinely values both principled direction and continuous learning. It's about developing a truly flexible mindset for change. Covey's maturity continuum is a great framework for this, moving from dependence to independence, that's self-mastery, and then finally to interdependence, effective relationships. It highlights the deep personal journey needed for leaders and team members to be effective in any change model. It's about developing people who can contribute meaningfully, whether they're following a vision or helping create it, and then collaborating effectively.
That journey from independence to interdependence is key for collaboration.
Absolutely. And Richard Umelt, in Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, he points out how our minds dodge the painful work of questioning and letting go of our first early judgments. We all do this. This cognitive bias applies to everyone, and we have to actively fight it to embrace real change. Whether that's a leader reevaluating their big vision because new data came in, or a team honestly questioning the results of an experiment that didn't work out. It requires that humility, that willingness to be wrong and learn.
Letting go of being right is hard.
So hard. And Daniel Kahneman's work in Thinking Fast and Slow offers these fascinating insights into how our mood affects decision-making. He found that a good mood loosens the control of System 2 over performance. So when we're in a good mood, we might be more intuitive, more creative, but also less vigilant, more prone to logical errors. A bad mood, conversely, signals that vigilance is required.
Interesting. So the emotional climate matters.
Yeah.
It really suggests that the overall emotional state of an organization could significantly impact how open it is to those emergent intuitive ideas, or how rigorous it is in executing a careful top-down plan. Understanding this psychological undercurrent seems vital when you're trying to orchestrate change. So remember, true effectiveness really seems to require balance. Your planning tools, as Covey said, should be your servant, never your master. And you need to prioritize effectiveness in dealing with people over just rigidly sticking to schedules. That kind of flexibility is what allows both strong visionary leadership and nimble emergent strategy to actually thrive together. It's about being grounded in your purpose, but really agile in how you get there.
So ultimately, what we've really explored today isn't about definitively choosing one path forever. It's much more about understanding the strengths and, the weaknesses of both visionary leadership and emergent strategy. Visionary leadership, it provides that compelling North Star, that fundamental why that aligns everyone. It gives purpose. Emergent strategy, that allows for the vital how, especially when the path isn't clear. It's the iterative exploration, the adaptation you need to navigate uncharted waters and discover completely new opportunities. The most powerful transformations seem to weave these two together, creating this robust yet flexible approach to change. An organization that can, dream big and learn really quickly.
Right. So here's maybe a final thought for you to mull over. In your own world, your own sphere of influence, when is the bolder, maybe risk-taking, even highly inefficient move like an Elon Musk rapidly scaling SpaceX or Tesla more appropriate? And when is the methodical, customer-centric, learn-from-the-ground approach, like Sam Walton literally walking competitors' aisles, more effective? And conversely, when is that hands-on, grassroots learning better than just waiting for the next top-down directive? The answer perhaps lies in finding that sweet spot, combining the conviction of a clear, maybe even unshakable purpose with the genuine humility of continuous learning and adaptation. We really hope this deep dive has given you some powerful insights into leading change, whether you're the one initiating it or you're adapting to it. Until next time, keep dating, keep learning, and keep leading.